Napoleon's hour for rising was uncertain, though generally early. It much depended on the rest he took during the day or the sultry state of the weather. Occasionally, he would sleep for an hour or two on the bench under our trellised grape walk at the Friars. When he awoke refreshed, would write or dictate away for hours together. Sometimes he would diversify his occupation by riding round our lawn on his beautiful black horse, Hope. The name pleased him. It was the first he had ridden on the island, and he liked the augury. After his long day sleeps, he would court the drowsy god at night by desiring Marchand to read to him until the sweet restorer, nature's soft nurse, came to his aid. Frequently, when the nights were illumined by the splendid tropical moon, would he rise at 3 o'clock and saunter down to the garden long before old Toby had slept off his first nap, and there he would regale himself with an early breakfast of delicious fruits, with which our garden abounded. Our old Malay was so fond of the man Boney, as he designated the emperor, that he always placed the garden key where Napoleon's fingers could reach it under the wicket. No one else was ever favored in the like manner, but he had completely fascinated and won the old man's heart, and Napoleon looked upon Toby with a kind of romantic interest, as one who had been cruelly wronged in his youthful career. After these early risings, he generally fasted until 11, when he would breakfast a la fourchette with his suite. He usually ate very fast, but did not admire highly seasoned dishes. He preferred a roasted leg of mutton to any other English joint, and I have often seen him take the knuckle in his hand and pare off all the brown part of it. Napoleon had some very beautiful seals and rare coins, from which he good-naturedly employed himself in taking off impressions in sealing wax. Whilst he was thus engaged, I once mischievously jogged his elbow and caused him to drop the hot wax in his fingers. It was very painful and raised a large blister, but he was so very good-natured about it that I told him I was quite sorry for what I had done, whereas, had he been cross, he should have rejoiced. Chapter 15. The Legend of Friars Valley, Bust of the Young King of Rome, the Emperor's emotion on showing it, exhibition of some toys sent by Lady Holland to Madame Bertrand's children. It was not long after Napoleon had been at Longwood that chance took him in one of his rides to a romantic glen named the Friars Valley, a wildly picturesque spot, so called from the peculiar formation of a huge rock fashioned by nature's hand into the figure of a monk with his cowl thrown back, dressed in flowing robes, with a rosary at his side. He forms a peculiar feature in the grotesque scenery with which great part of the island abounds. That immediately around it, consisting of stupendous sterile rocks detached by deep and frightful ravines, some rising perpendicularly many hundred feet, and here and there are seen very masses of stone towering aloft, with flowering aloes bursting forth from fissures in their iron-colored sides. I have endeavored to convey, in the annex sketch, some faint idea of this romantic, though desolate-looking valley. Napoleon had heard of the legend connected with it, and asked me if I had ever seen Will-o'-the-Wisp, which he was told lighted the old friar's lantern. I said I had often been frightened by it, for when quite a little child, my mother, thinking the air on the mountains purer than that of St. James Valley, generally sent me thither under the care of an old nurse who resided in a little cottage directly overlooking the vale. Oftentimes would she threaten, if I did not repeat my letters correctly, to give me to the monk who would carry me off in his lantern. I perfectly recollect how heartily the emperor laughed at my describing the tricks I played on old Sarah. I had a box of letters, which it was her daily duty to see me arrange and place in alphabetical order. My great fun was to turn them topsy-turvy, at the same time keeping them quite straight. When I placed them properly, I arranged them unevenly, but the dear old nurse, who did not understand the letter in her alphabet, was certain to commend me for the neat arrangement I had effected. But when I was threatened with the friar, when my lesson presented an untidy appearance, however right it might be. The story attached to the valley was this. The place where the friar now stands was supposed to once have been the site of a Roman Catholic chapel, adjoining which was the residence of the officiating priest, a monk of the Franciscan order, who was considered an example of Christian piety and humility, his life being passed in the performance of acts of charity and benevolence, such as attending the sick, relieving the oppressed. And often did he interpose his charitable interference between the severe taskmaster and his wretched slaves, when the latter were condemned for some trifling offense to undergo fearful mutilations or the cruel lash. Thus, in acts of piety, this man of God pursued his way, blessing and blessed, till his senses became enthralled by the surpassing beauty of a mountain nymph who dwelt in a cottage not far removed from the friar's only habitation. It was in one of his rambles in search of some object of charity that his eyes first encountered this lovely daughter of the Atlantic Isle, tending a herd of her father's mountain goats. They had strayed so far that she had vainly tried to collect them, and was returning tired and sad to her dwelling when encountering the monk. She humbly told her tale and asked for his assistance. It was readily accorded, for who could resist such an appeal enhanced by so much beauty? The scattered flock was reunited, and the young girl, gracefully acknowledging his service with a light heart, returned to her home. It would have been well for the good father had that interview been the last, but fate ordained it otherwise. Again and again he sought her mountain cot, pouring into the maiden's ear his tale of love and adoration, and finally besought her to be his bride. She promised, but on one condition only, to listen to his suit. He must renounce his creed and become of her faith. Upon these terms alone would she consent, and until he had resolved thus to prove his devotion, must not hope to see her again. The struggle was a fearful one in the breast of the monk, but love triumphed in the end. He forsook the faith of his fathers, broke his vows, and became a renegade. In due course of time, the wedding day was fixed. The ceremony was to be performed in that very chapel which had so often re-echoed the apostate's pious prayers for his suffering flock, and the bride, accompanied by her attendant maidens, approached the altar. The service was read, and just as the bridegroom was clasping the hand of his beloved, a fearful crash resounded. The rock was rent asunder, and every vestige of the chapel and of those it contained forever disappeared. In its place stands the gaunt image of the grim friar, an example and a sad warning to those who suffer their evil passions to prevail over their better judgment.